Okay, it's 6:30, and the band is ready to go. Did you think you were coming for some other kind of meeting? You did? Is this the Dawson Ranch meeting? I go to so many of them. So, okay, Dawson Ranch tonight, 6:30. Tomorrow we're going to have Wolf Park at 10 o'clock. It will be here in the City Hall. Of course, if you want to come to that, you can. The dynamics are a little different between the two subdivisions. You might find some of that interesting, but their meeting is tomorrow at 10 o'clock. We do have people here. We have Adam Lancaster, who's our city engineer. Oh, before we go any farther, there's a tablet going around here. We'd like to just have your address and maybe your name. And if you don't know either, then just leave it blank. So, so just bring that around. We'd be done. I'd like to hold it to about an hour. If it goes longer, that's fine. But at my age, that's pushing my bedtime. And you know what I'm talking about, don't? So, up here we have Tony Faljean. He's our streets man. We have Jolene, Jolene, right? Glenda. I should know all these people. I have Glenda. She's with Stormwater. We have Caitlin Turner, City Council. John Hamrick, City Council. We got Amanda Cochran, City Council. Dolly Gonzalez. Nobody has a name like Dolly, do they? Okay. Dolly Gonzalez, City Council. Tony O'Rourke, our City Administrator. Jim Meisner, come on up here, Jim. Come out of the dark. And don't chicken out. And Ashley, and she lives in Dawson Ranch too, as you know. We'd like to. This is going to be televised. Anybody can see it. So we'd like to hold the same rules that we have with City Council. We'd like to not have any loud outbursts and be respectful of what everybody has to say. I know you will. And so we can get through. We'd like to listen to everybody. If we have a whole lot of people that want to talk, we might want to limit it to about two minutes each, like we do at City Council. So, but let's just get going and see how it goes. So I'd like to start out with Judy Repass. You know her. So to say hi.
I'm amazed at the attendance. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all, since all of us have been faced with stormwater concerns. And I hope some of your questions will get answered tonight, and we can move on and correct some of our problems. So welcome, and let's see where this goes. Thank you.
And as you all know, Judy's the president of the Homeowners Association. Okay? Okay.
Thanks, Judy.
Next up, we have our city engineer, Adam Lancaster. And he's going to go over an overview of a lot of you. We had maps and a plan and a budget and everything there. If you didn't get one of those, let us know if we ran out. And so what we'll do is we'll open up with Mr. Lancaster. And does that work?
Yep, sounds
okay.
Good.
So why don't you go ahead?
All right, welcome. So in preparing this presentation, we had some information that City Council asked us to put out to you, and we also had a number of questions that the HOA presented to us to help clarify some things and get some things in front of you. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background on the stormwater utility. And again, as the mayor said, you have the packets in front of you to take a look at and follow along as we go. But essentially, historically here in Canyon City, I'm not sure how many of you are from here or have been here very long, but we've experienced numerous flood events throughout the years. What's interesting is we've had very few flood events that were associated with the river. Most of the flood events we have are from the local drainage ways to the river. We actually have a fair amount of actual floodplain mapped within the city that have nothing to do with the riverbed. And our local soils, especially in the north side of town, don't absorb very much moisture. Type D soils create a lot of runoff, and in your particular neighborhood, of course, then the slopes come into play as well. We also, unfortunately, have a history of building over the top of the drainage ways and then not creating any infrastructure facilities to handle where that water should have went and when we built that way. And that's not unique to your neighborhood. That's pretty much citywide. We have that issue, and we have a number of drainage basins that don't even have an outlet, a formal outlet to the river itself. So a lot of what we're going to talk about, and a lot of it that has to do with the money we spend, started with the Clean Water Act in the 1970s. Everybody here, every time I have someone come to my office and we talk about stormwater, especially stormwater quality or stormwater fees, I ask them if they want clean water, and I've never had anybody say no. We all want clean water. The trick there is how we get there, and the federal government has decided a route for that and created a law for that, and that's where we get the Clean Water Act. Then we had the phase 2 of that in 1999, which then pulled in smaller communities such as ours based on population to look at stormwater quality. Again, talking about clean water, not quantity of water. And that was something then that we got pulled into. That the city is mandated by both the federal and the state government. They just hand it down the line as we go to who's responsible and who has to spend the money. But they have mandated that we control those stormwater discharges and what's in those stormwater discharges. It's an unfunded mandate, which means we don't receive any outside funding for that. Every bit of that is funded through the city of Kansas City. Roll back a little bit before that, before the phase 2, we had a citizens committee that was formulated, and their main function was to look at stormwater drainage problems associated with water quantity, flood problems. And so they, in the mid-late 90s, got the city to spend some money in developing some drainage basin plans for the city of Kansas City. We have 7 separate drainage basins within the city, and we created a plan, a master plan for each one of those. And this was prior or during the time that Dawson Ranch was being built. So Dawson Ranch was not included in that master planning at the time because it wasn't, it was just in its initial stages. And they recommended, and then they knew, so they created this list of projects. We handed out a copy of that list. It's a $75 million capital improvement plan, and that was created by that committee. Nothing's really changed on that list except for the cost of doing that work. It's been adjusted for the inflation since it was originally created. So then they recommended that we form a stormwater utility to pay for that. At the time, it was very unpopular idea of raising taxes or additional monies in some ways to pay for that, and it kind of stalled. Then came along the phase 2. That was that MS4 permit program that was mandated by the federal and state governments, and we didn't have a choice. We had to come up with money somehow to fund the stormwater program relative to water quality. And so in 2003, we received our permit, and if you look at the list of those mandatory programs within the permit for water quality, you can see very little that has to do with anything with flooding. There is some maintenance in there and some post-construction type stuff where we build detention ponds for new development and so forth, but very little of it has to do with the capital projects that you see in that long list. So in 2004, after we received our first permit, the City Council decided to form the utility. And in doing so, they created the fee structure that we have today. Again, very unpopular at the time. City Council knew that, but their hands were tied as far as having to run the permit program. So knowing that, they created a fee structure that was the absolute minimum in order to run the permit program with no capital improvement dollars associated with that. There was a thought that any extra monies or additional revenues that were collected would be banked, and from time to time we could rob the piggy bank and build a project. And we've done that throughout the years. But again, in our current fee structure, there is not any allowance really for capital improvements. We've had a number of advisory committees since then that we've worked through to address these issues, and we've had active communications between the city and your homeowners association since its inception in discussing these problems and how to overcome them. Which brings us to today. We formed another task force, and we have a task force that's currently still standing. It was formed in 2017, and it was made up of city council members, Fremont County commissioners, city staff, representatives of council of governments, as well as the ditch companies. And that was the main push last year to create a new task force was because of the way the stormwater was impacting the irrigation ditches. And so the mission of that task force was to create a roadmap moving forward on how to address these issues and how to fund them. As always, that's been the issue, is how do we fund these improvements. So in their review, they come up with a number of options and reviewed some of the legalities of those options. They included anything from increasing fees, what grants may be available, certificates of participation, improvement districts, special districts, or authorities. And we can talk a little bit later about improvement districts, because I've heard there's been some discussion about that in Dawson Ranch. But in a nutshell, an improvement district is a district that's formed for a region or a neighborhood who is willing to assess themselves to make an improvement. And so they would petition city council to create a district and then build the project and then assess the residents who benefit from those improvements. So that's kind of where we got today. Now let's talk about where we're at with budget currently. So current revenues, you see we're just over $1 million in revenue. Same in our expenditures. We have zero capital outlay this year for 2018, and our reserve fund is very low. We've got just $95,000 in there for reserve. Keep in mind, this is the fund where we would, what would use for emergencies if there was a large flood event where the city or residents needed a lot of assistance. This is the fund that would come from. Obviously not adequate, doesn't even meet the conditions for, the city council's condition for the minimum reserves on any of the city funds. An important thing to note that we found is interesting, and we just think we ought to share that with you, is that in the past 10 years, we've only had about 1.5% growth annually, citywide. So we're not, the funds are not growing. They're pretty stagnant from year to year. And even with our building boom, which is where the fees come from, it's not enough to make a big impact annually, year to year for the budget. However, we have spent $4 million in the past 10 years on capital improvements. So that came from that rainy day fund that we've saved and spend and spend and save, or save and spend. That's where those projects came from, and those are various projects throughout the city. Another thing to note is that we're down on staff. I mean, again, we're talking about resources. And so city staff is down 9% in those 10 years as well. The next couple slides, you won't be able to see them up here, and we printed them so they're bigger so you can see them there in your hand, but that's just for future reference or reference tonight for discussion if you want. But I included the two budget statements of revenue and expenditures for the Stormwater Fund if you want to see actually where the money's coming from and where it's going and what it's being spent on. So other city revenue, we just talked about stormwater fees, because other people always often ask, well, what are you doing with our property tax? What are you doing with the sales tax? So property tax, if you don't know, in Canyon City is extremely low compared to other places. For an average $220,000 home, they're paying us $46 a year in property tax. Our mill levy, 2.9 mill levy, is 62% lower than the statewide average. So very good cost of living here, which we all love and certainly don't necessarily want to change. And then sales tax. Our city budget is very dependent on sales tax. And because of that, and because of some recent changes we've had to make, it's one of the highest in the state. And so raising, there's some concern about raising tax rates even further, may then actually hurt us because we're going to be driving some of those local purchases out of town. So then again, the next two slides, for your reference, this is a nice comparison in this pie chart. It shows you what the city of Canyon City collects from you versus the other governmental entities within the county. And so you can see that our piece of the pie is very small compared to some of those other entities. And this next one, again, you're not going to be able to read it on the screen, and you may even have a hard time reading it on the sheet, but that compares the city's sales tax rate to other communities within Colorado. So what are our needs? We've talked about a little bit of that already. You have that sheet in front of you. The $75 million backlog of priority projects. Those priorities were based on, the mitigation necessary where the structural damage, property values, population, and flood insurance premiums are the highest, or where people are at the highest risk, greater risk. And so a fair amount of those areas are within North Canyon because that's where the majority of flood insurance policyholders live and where there's the greatest amount of structure and life at risk, as well as commerce. So that kind of gives you an idea how that list was put together. And that also explains to you why the top projects off that list are the Northeast Canyon Drainage Basin, the Orchard Avenue Outfall. So the Orchard Avenue Outfall in particular is one of the ones that affects the largest irrigation ditch in town. The Orchard Avenue Outfall has some upstream detention and some channel improvements, but south of Cherry Street has no outfall to the river. So we have several miles worth of channel that would have to be built to eliminate some of those floodplain issues there. And then the other one I'm sure you're familiar with, if you've ever driven North 9th Street in a storm, is the North 9th Street storm sewer. That's necessary. And so you see there on top projects, you know, we're a little over just about $30 million there. So again, as I mentioned, no projects in Dawson Ranch are currently identified in the priority list. And that was mainly because the list was created before Dawson Ranch was identified even as a concern. People always ask us about grants. Well, why can't you get a grant? There aren't a lot of grants out there for this. The majority of the grant, there are some smaller conservation, soil conservation grants and so forth. But to pay for this type of work, you're looking, the biggest biggest possibility out there is FEMA. And the FEMA grants are highly competitive. There's a 20% match that's required. And recently, with the current administration, they capped the grants at $4 million. And the majority of our projects are much more expensive than that. So we actually had an application ready last year for a project. It's a $12 million total project for the Northeast Canyon Basin. It's designed and ready to be built. But with the $4 million cap, there was no way we could come up with the $8 million difference and the 20% match. Also, the interesting thing about FEMA grants is they require a benefit cost analysis of greater than 1. What that means is they want to see that the cost of the project is much less than the cost of either potential or actual structural damage or loss of life. And so, again, FEMA is looking at structures. They're looking at insurable items, not landscape or those sorts of things. So that's been an issue that we've had in town here before too, is proving up that benefit cost and getting it to a point where it even qualifies for a grant. There's no grants out there that I know of whatsoever for maintenance. A lot of the problems that we do have is affording to do some of our basic maintenance. And disaster recovery is either not available or it's not really appropriate for the types of things that we see happening in Dawson Ranch. There was some disaster recovery money spent in Dawson Ranch. We'll talk about that a little later as well, from the storms in 2013 and 15. So that's citywide stuff. So let's talk a little bit about what has been going on in Dawson Ranch. So in the past 10 years in Dawson Ranch, we have done a fair amount of work. We've done that emergency repair work that I was talking about. Some of that was in 2008. We have partnered with the HOA on doing some cleanup of the outlots with tree and brush removal after some of the beetle kill. We've done a fair amount of work on the Storm Ridge Channel. One of our biggest projects up there to date was the stabilization of the Wild Rose Channel that stretches from Wild Rose to Ptarmigan up above the bottom pond. That was a $225,000 project to get that done. And then, of course, we're always up there doing mowing and erosion repairs. The chart you see here does not include some of the smaller projects, and it does not include any of the city crew work that's done up in Dawson Ranch. This is only contract work that this chart reflects. And basically what this chart shows us is that Dawson Ranch has received, in this 10-year period, has received 11% of the stormwater funds, while your stormwater fees have only paid 6%. So that's a common question. I just want to emphasize that Dawson Ranch is getting its fair share of the funding that is, and the projects that are done. So as I mentioned, that 11% of the funds didn't include the stormwater or the street crews that do stormwater work. In 2017, the stormwater crews spent about $37,000 up there. And then this year, the first storm after the 4th of July, they spent another $18,000. And then they spent $66,000 and counting. They are still not done. One of the things I want to make a point of is the crew from the city that goes up and works up there and is doing some of the culvert cleaning and shoulder repairs, the same crew citywide that fills potholes, does street repairs, does utility patching, does sign maintenance, does street sweeping, same crew. And so because of that, they're going to take a break from some of the work that they've been doing right now in Dawson Ranch because they've got to get caught up on some of those other things. So that may be one of the questions that comes up tonight. When do you think we might be done with some of that sort of stuff? And Tony Fangini is here to answer some of those questions if we have some of those. And of course, we have some other bigger repairs that we're trying to do. That we had a breach in the bottom pond off of Ptarmigan and Wild Rose. We did not feel it was. We knew we were pretty much at the end of the monsoon season. We didn't feel that it was necessarily a priority to jump on right away. However, we had a third-party complaint from the neighborhood to the Department of Health that there was a threatened discharge, and so the state has mandated to us that we get that done sooner than later. So we are spending a fair amount of time and money in repairing that pond right now too, and depending on what it costs may dictate what else we may be able to get done this year in Dawson Ranch. So back to some of the issues that we've identified in Dawson Ranch. We know different than in some other areas in Canyon City, we've got very steep slopes up there, and we have an incredible amount of sediment transfer, and that deposition of the sediment in the culverts and the ditches when it does rain, that's probably the largest issue I would say that we have to overcome in Dawson Ranch. Why is it that way? All I can say is at the time when that was developed, prior to any of us being here, the developer insisted on an urban layout within that area. They didn't want to do any overlot grading, which is typically done in a subdivision, because they didn't want to destroy some of the natural landscaping. And they used that urban lot layout and right-of-way width for their maximum lot build-out, obviously, to gain as much profit as possible. That's typically what's done in a development. The problem was the city had no rural mountain subdivision standards whatsoever at the time. We didn't really have a measuring stick to use at all in evaluating the development, and so it got built the way it is. There was a fair amount of those drainage easements or drainage ways, as we mentioned earlier, that were filled in. Roads were built across them. Every single one of you on your lot line has a drainage easement, but we all know that the water doesn't run neatly down your property line. Because that's how it's typically done in an urban development where there's overlot grading performed on each lot before it's sold. So the HOA, if they haven't shared it with you, we can get that information out. They generated a list of concerns and issues that they saw back in 2015. And then the complaints that were received from the July storms. Basically, 32% of the complaints that we received citywide were from Dawson Ranch. 7% of those complaints received from Dawson Ranch were relevant to plugged culverts or driveways that were washed out. 17% of the complaints had to do with road shoulders, and 76%, clear majority, had to do with landscape damage and site drainage issues. To date, we don't have any information on whether there was any structural damage done or home damage due to runoff. We know there was a lot of damage due to wind and hail. So those are one of the things that we're always interested in knowing, again, so that we can prioritize projects is what kind of stuff is going on out there and what kind of problems you're seeing. We do have a hotline that Glenda answers, and she takes down all that information, she enters it into the database, and we use that often to be able to prioritize the resources. So that's why I don't have a number there, because we have yet to hear from anybody that had that type of damage. Again, back to FEMA and that benefit cost analysis, those would be the types of things that are important if we ever want to build a case for a competitive grant in that scenario. So after looking at what the complaints are, it's important to look and see what each of our obligations are as property owners and as the stormwater utility. So this next slide, there's two sections of the code that discuss the property owner's obligations relevant to what we are talking about as far as the issues in Dawson Ranch. It is the responsibility of the property owner to keep the gutters and ditches adjacent to their property free of obstructions and allowing the free flow of water. So culverts, for the benefit of an individual property, such as a driveway culvert, the general public doesn't use that culvert. That culvert is there for the benefit of that property for their driveway. That culvert would be the responsibility of the property owners to keep free flowing. The ditch that's in the right-of-way adjacent to the property, even though it's in the city right-of-way, is still the obligation of the adjacent property owner to maintain and keep free flowing. And that's citywide. People that have curb and gutter in front of their house, they're responsible for keeping that curb and gutter unblocked and running free. It's also your responsibility to maintain the right-of-way to the edge, basically from the edge, your property line to the edge of the improved roadway. And that typically has to do with weeds, cutting weeds, keeping things clear, and that sort of stuff. So that leads to the next discussion, which is a common problem that we have in Dawson Ranch. And that's how those shoulders or right-of-way areas that you're responsible for maintaining are landscaped. Back in 2008, we saw a fair number of problems happening after those storms. A lot of the issues that were generated by some of the landscaping that was done in the right-of-way. Not to mention that some of the work or the things that were placed in the right-of-way were dangerous to the traveling public. And so we created a standard detail and a specification for landscaping within the right-of-way specific to Dawson Ranch and Wolf Park and other areas similar. And I know that you've had that detail on your Homeowners Association website in the past. I don't know if it's still there, and it's on the city's website. But in a nutshell, you're to maintain and keep and maintain that minimum 5-foot shoulder, gravel shoulder on the edge of the road. That's required. That's a part of the roadway system. It's part of the recovery area on the road. And it's also, if it's maintained as a gravel shoulder, is the easiest way for us to come back and fix it after a storm event. Again, it's your responsibility to keep the ditches and the flow lanes clear. A common issue is people use riprap for, well, whether they use it for stabilization or not, or whether they're using it for landscape aesthetics, they put riprap in the ditch. And riprap is designed, in ditches, is designed to stabilize the bottom of the ditch. And so essentially the riprap should be buried. Most times it should not be exposed. And a lot of people who landscape, instead of digging the ditch down, the invert down in the ditch, they'll just dump the rock in there. Basically, whatever the thickness of the riprap is, eliminating that much volume capability of the ditch by filling it with rock. And then they extend that rock up to the shoulder. And again, the rock is sitting on top of the shoulder. So the water that should be flowing off the road into the ditch never makes it to the ditch because it runs into that riprap. The other issue we've had is some people don't want to ditch at all, so they put a culvert in their entire frontage, and they don't put any cleanouts in or breaks in the culvert, and so then when the culvert does get silted in, it's very difficult to clean. The code says nothing, no vertical improvements or landscaping should be in those areas that we just discussed, and essentially that's 8 inches is what we're talking about. I know there's some folks that have placed boulders, decorative boulders and those sorts of things along the edge of the road on the shoulder, and those things shouldn't be in there. The final thing on obligations is drainage easements. So drainage easements were created when the subdivision was platted, and the obligation to maintain that easement is on the underlying property owner's obligation. The public and your neighbor has a right to flow water there, but they're not required to maintain that easement. That's on the individual property owner. I'm not talking about the city outlots, I'm talking about easements in general there in Dawson Ranch. So this follow-up slide, this is the detail that we created back in 2008. Basically on top is what you should do, and on the bottom is what you should not do. So what is the city supposed to do? What are our obligations as your government and as the utility? All the culverts that cross the public roadways, those are ours to maintain, those are ours to replace when they fail, those are ours to keep clean. The city drainage outlots that we own up there as a government, we have to take care and maintain those. All the detention ponds in Dawson Ranch, those are the city's obligation, and any other regional facilities that are in the area. And finally, the road shoulders. Again, the shoulder of the road is part of the road system. That's part that the street crews are supposed to take care of. Oftentimes they run into the ability to be able to drop a road grader down and do that because of landscaping that's in the way. So we talked a little bit about this earlier, but a couple of past Dawson Ranch projects we've done. We did some diversion walls at Wild Rose and Bluegrass in the intersection there. We did emergency repairs in 2007, 15, 17, and 18. We worked cooperatively with the HOA on brush and dead tree removal in 2008, 9, and 12. We did that stabilization on Wild Rose channel. And we've been working on the Storm Ridge channel, stabilizing it. Each year when we've had a little extra money left over, we'll go up and build a little bit more of that. And we plan to do some more of that this year as well on Storm Ridge. So what has your HOA done for you? They've done a lot. In 2015, a number of your neighbors, Mr. Sinker, Mr. Spencer, the Ingmans, and others, they went out on their own and did an extensive survey and drainage analysis of the subdivision and provided the city with a lot of data. A lot of that data that we intend to use soon. And at that same time, they established some short-term, long-term priorities for us. And they provide us constant monitoring out there. They give us feedback from you and provide us recommendations on what those priorities should be. They have partnered with us a number of times on projects and also getting the word out to you on things that are going on and what we're doing. And more recently, have offered to match some funds on some of the projects that we're looking at doing. So what were because we created these priorities before our storm. So what are our priority projects in Dawson Ranch this year? We have been basically chasing complaints since the time Dawson Ranch was built. And we'd like to be a little more proactive than that. And so we know with that, there has to be a deeper analysis, a little bit of science applied to what we're doing rather than just reacting out there every time there's a shift in the soils and those sorts of things. So we are contracting with an engineering company to do an analysis on the existing culvert system and then to prioritize for us which culverts we should be replacing first and maybe what sizes they should be. One of the issues with the culverts, again, is that sediment transfer. You know, typically when drainage studies are done, they're done assuming clear pipes. And we know that that's often not the case in Dawson Ranch. And so we will be taking a look at some of those things. And that engineer will be using a fair amount of the information that the HOA has developed for us on their own time. The HOA has offered very graciously to match $10,000 on that project. And so we for sure will be able to get that done this year. Should have a signed contract with Icon Engineering by next week to get that going. Eagle Crest Loop, there is a spot on the original design of the subdivision that was supposed to have a culvert drain across the street. That culvert was not installed at the time the subdivision was built, and it's a spot that's a repeat issue. And so we have developed a plan to install that culvert and some drains in that area and hope to also work on that this year. And then we'd like to complete the balance of the drop structures on the northern end of Storm Ridge with a cost of about $50,000. Now, all that was before we knew about the breach in the pond down below, and we're thinking that it may cost as much as that, hopefully not more, but it is a time and material project. So what's the future? What's the future of the stormwater utility? So back to that task force that we have currently. One of the things that flushed out of that task force was we need a regional answer to this. It's not just the citizens within the city of Kansas City that are affected by this, and we're not our areas of runoff are not the only contributing areas to the problem as well. And so we see it as more of a regional issue, and the best way to deal with that is a regional utility. And currently, right now, the county commissioners are fairly reluctant to support a special district or the way we have the fees structured now. So we do need to work on that some. But the fee structure we have now, we know is legally defensible, and it's also very fair. And with results that we got just recently from our citizens survey, satisfaction with our stormwater utility services have improved, but they're still woefully low. If you see in 2017, we were rated at 24% for excellent and good, bumped up to 32% this year. So again, long ways to go there. Certainly not acceptable. Also, we asked them if they were in favor of a regional solution, as I just discussed, and there was 65% of the respondents that thought that was a good idea. And surprisingly enough, 51% of them thought a sales tax increase was a good idea. One thing that the City Council is considering for the 2019 budget, because they know that this regional solution is a process, and it will have to go through a lot of public education. There's some formal processes that it has to go through and so forth that's going to take some time. City councils recognize they don't really want to wait for that. They need to move on something sooner than later. So one thing that they are considering for the 2019 budget is certificates of participation to fund some priority projects off the list, as we discussed. And one of the priority projects they have identified in that is $1 million worth of improvements within Dawson Ranch that we would use, starting probably with that culvert analysis and then moving forward from there on other projects that are within the subdivision. So we know a fee increase is necessary for the capital improvement plan. We did a rate analysis for the utility in 2017, and the conclusion of that was a 2,000% increase was necessary to cash fund the CIP. That's why they're looking at the COP option. One thing to note on the COPs is the balance of the city assets will be mortgaged for 20 years, eliminating any other borrowing capacity the city may have. But $8 million worth of money, at this time, we're estimating it would be about a 45% increase, plus a 5% thereafter would be necessary to maintain the payment on the COPs. That increase, that 45% increase, equates to about $4 a month for an average residential property. So that's what's being currently considered. That even comes close to providing any type of resources to address any of the issues that we're looking at in Dawson Ranch and citywide. That concludes my presentation. I think the mayor then has a process then for taking input or questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Good. Would you like to start that by row or by, so in the interest of a lot of people that want to have questions, keep it maybe to the point, you can say short and sweet, just short.
I just wanted to know your name.
Oh, sorry, Adam Lancaster.
Oh, you're happy. Yeah. Oh, you
You don't want to.
Larry Richardson, 40 Ptarmigan Trail. I think it was about 10. Is that better? Okay, sorry about that. You have to have it right in your mouth. About the 10th slide back was the budget numbers, and the vast majority of expenditures of the storm drain fund is transfers to other funds. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. Good question. So the stormwater fund, just like any business, so it's an enterprise fund. It has to be ran as a business. The funds can't intermix with the other city funds, but there's a lot of other departments that perform functions for the stormwater. Finance collects the fees. Finance does the accounting. So they have to bill the enterprise fund for those services. We talked about the city crew doing a lot of the work. All of Tony's crew is paid out of the general fund. So the general fund has to be reimbursed by the stormwater fund for that work that they do on stormwater work. So that big transfer is for all those other additional services that the stormwater receives. Portion of that is, so the engineering department, for example, we work on streets, we work on water lines, we work on stormwater. So a portion of our salary comes from stormwater, a portion of it comes from the water enterprise, some of it comes from the general fund. Good question.
Grant Adkisson. And by the way, your introduction was on how long people have been here. My mom's family came in 1888. My dad's 1920. So we've lived here a long time. But try to keep it to the questions. On your one page, you said the developer insisted on urban lot layout and right-of-way widths for maximum build-out. City has no mountain subdivision standards or practices. I would imagine most subdividers would have asked or demanded things that the city would not have let them do if it was going to be poor drain water access. And then your next page says, landscaping right-of-way, the obligations, you have to keep city specifications, details S18, maintain 5 feet of shoulder, flow lines, ditches clear. But that seems to be rural mountain subdivision standards. Those must have come after TZAC put that in, in the subdivision.
That standard was a reaction to the problems that we started experiencing up in those subdivisions. So that came in 2008, was that discussion. So 10 years later, after the development was completed. Okay. Yeah. A good example to use on, so since my time here and some of the others' time here, if you're familiar with Gold Canyon subdivision, that's the standard. And if you've been in that neighborhood, you've seen that it's very similar topography and sorts of things like that, same soils, but they don't have any of the issues or near the issues that Dawson Ranch has because it was built to the standard, the new standard that we have for those subdivisions.
Okay. The next question is, that has to do with that, and we ranched outside of town, but we always had a home. Both families had homes in town. So I lived on 9th Street. We saw some flooding, some other things. But the difference is, like at my home on Cedar Ridge, we now have a 15-foot canyon through the property, 4 foot at the low edge, at the short edge, and then filled in all the culvert, and of course your city crews, and some of them I know, and they're all, hardworking guys and gals, and I appreciate all of them, but they said, well, we have the equipment to blow it out, but we can't do that. So really, I guess the only option I would have, and some of the others, would be to get a backhoe and just dig out the whole culvert and either put in a cement trough to go through to get in the driveway so it doesn't fill in again. I'm not sure. The problem is we have no curb and gutter. And I remember, of course, I've done a lot of work with Bill, Jim, Ed, Mike, TZAC, and I can remember Ed saying in the beginning, of course, he's a little redneck, and he's passed away now, so I'm not talking about that, but he said, well, I won't repeat part of what he said about the city being anxious to get some tax money that wouldn't go to the county, but it'd be in the city, but he said, they're not requiring me to put in curb and gutter, like his comment, like all the rest of Canyon City, but we're going to be city. So the difference is when we had flooding on 9th Street, it was just water, maybe leaves, maybe some branches. But I got, I found debris on mine that was up 6 and 7 and 8 blocks. So I understand my responsibility is to maintain that space in front of my house, but I can't maintain 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 blocks worth of gravel and boulders and all of that. So I don't know, maybe the budget is going to address that? Is there, I guess the question is there any chance to get curb and gutter where it goes on down? I don't even mind it going on the 15-foot canyon between the houses, but it flooded the house. I took over 100 skid loader buckets of silt and dirt off my driveway after I got all the big boulders. And I mean, some of them basketball size and bigger. So, I mean, we just want help. We love the city, we love the county, we want to work together, but I don't know what our answer is without curbs and gutter, or, like I said, I can't get my culvert blown out, so I'll probably just have to remove it and maybe just put, I guess, cement in so I can go through, I can't go through riprap, so I can go through the cement dip or something to go get into my driveway and keep it from flooding. It did flood the house, and of course, I don't know the original, one last thing, I promise, percentages. I didn't call to complain because I thought, well, we could, get the meeting. So I don't know what percentage when you're looking at maybe 0% damage to homes, or at least as far as you knew, as far as somebody calling. It's probably like most telemarketer deals, if you get 2% that answered, a bunch more people heard it, and so I don't know how many people called and said, we've got 15-foot ditch through our yard, we don't have a yard left anymore, or whatever. I did not try to call and give you a report. Maybe I should have. So anyway, several questions there, but
Yeah, the big one is the common discussion is curb and gutter, what can we do? Is there any way we can do that? The mechanism I spoke to earlier was an improvement district, special improvement district, and an improvement district wouldn't even have to be Dawson Ranch wide. It could be specific neighborhoods or streets where you could do an improvement district.
so we could do a collective curb and gutter project ourselves?
Yes. Yep.
Can you elaborate on what that would take?
Yeah. So the process again is you would petition as property owners. The city council would not consider a petition unless you had at least 51% of the property owners signing in behalf of the project. The vote is by linear foot or benefit. So for curb and gutter, it'd be linear foot of frontage. So whoever has the bigger property gets more votes because they have to they pay more. You petition city council, they create the district, then they direct city staff to create the project. We build it, then you are assessed at the time after construction. You're assessed the cost per your parcel of land, and then the city, that assessment goes as a special assessment on your tax bill that you pay for 10 years. It is interest bearing. City doesn't want to be a bank, so the interest is purposely high. Most people then would go and refinance, or they'll pay it down without penalty at any point in time. But a lot of people will refinance an improvement district because they don't want to pay 10%, because that's typically what it is on an improvement district. And then you enjoy the improvement while it's paid off. There's been a lot of property owners that have said, hey, I'm just going to put curb and gutter in front of my house. And we've discouraged that when it's just a single owner, because it just doesn't work. It has to be a bigger project. It has to be, certain limits to that where it can perform and function like it's designed to.
Like in a driveway, like I was talking about, there is some restrictions. I guess you could put a dip in or something, a cement dip to go through?
Sure, what we call low flow or a Texas crossing. You could do that if your ditch is shallow enough. A lot of people have ditches that are deeper than that, so it may be difficult.
I think at least it would have kept it out of the house, and stuff. Maybe.
Absolutely.
But, the other thing with rural, I would assume Colorado water law, which I've read and got a son-in-law that's what he practices law out of Salida, but states that you can divert or put on your own property what is necessary to prevent damage from water, from stormwater. So I assume, as long as it's on our property, you could put in like a retaining wall or something, even a small something, to divert that water. I mean, it's a little, it's kind of like praying that the fire doesn't get your house, but it gets your neighbors. I mean, it is going to push it down farther.
Yeah,
but I mean, it's going to move it down.
And I can tell you, my experience is there's a lot of folks that repeat what they've done after each storm, and then they're surprised when things are damaged again. And I always suggest, people come to us all the time for suggestions. After July's events, I would say drive around the neighborhood and see whose stuff worked and whose stuff didn't. I mean, that's a pretty good indication.
Anybody else? Would you?
Mayor Dolly had a comment or a question.
Evening. It on? Okay, I got a big voice anyway, so I probably won't need this. A few things I heard tonight kind of struck me as odd in that we've had several studies, time and time again, keep kind of pointing out specific issues that the city keeps saying, yep, 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 sorry. And I'm kind of wondering if this isn't going to be another one of those that you said that as long as the HOA matches some of the money, some of the funds to do some of these projects that we're going to identify through the study, the city's also said if we don't have money available, we're still not going to be able to help you, sorry. I just kind of see a continuance of, we keep pointing out these same issues time and time again, and the city keeps kind of, sorry, we don't have money for it. How do we keep the cycle from happening again? Besides, we're all here trying to represent and have the HOA kick in money because there doesn't seem to be anything else we can do.
That's part of the bigger discussion that we have with City Council on funding. It's all about resources.
Okay.
You're right.
You mentioned something about properties, all the damages that you've seen or heard is from water and hail. Well, my property is one of the ones that got flooded. I'm at the bottom of Morning Dove Drive in Blue Grouse, which has got a small culvert, which will be addressed, agreed. But there's several residences that have been flooded, literally just 7 feet full of water because of unavailable runoff diversion. We couldn't get away from it. You just gotta kind of suck it up, I guess. And with the diversion of water, I understood to put a retaining wall. I think that's what some of the residents have done with their drives and some of the other things, putting large rocks to try to divert water away from washing their property away. They're trying to do that within reason, but you say it's against the code now to have these boulders along the road to keep from getting all this debris coming in the yard.
You shouldn't try to divert the water from the ditch. That's where it's supposed to go. Now, we have a number of examples, and we could probably have them even available to you for your HOA meeting that's coming up, but we have some good pictures of stuff up there, good examples of people who have really reinforced their side of the ditch. They've taken ownership and they've really dressed up their side of the ditch and reinforced it, or put that wall, so to speak, that you're talking about there. And that would be what we would want you to do. We wouldn't want you to block the ditch.
Okay. Just one other thing. Did you know that Blue Grouse, just there at Morning Dove, is actually eroding away? We're going to lose the road. I didn't see anything mentioned about Blue Grouse being on the project of it is leaving our neighborhood on the east side there at Morning Dove. It's just eroding down into the ditch.
Yeah. If you have, again, I had it in the slide as complaints, but really we need the information. Even if you're handling it with your insurance company, or even if the city doesn't have the resources to help you right now, again, without the information, the data, we can't react to it. Those are types of things that could help with grant applications. That's something that helps the city council prioritize things. That's something that helps the HOA, prioritize things for us up there. So if you've had those kinds of things, get a hold of Glenda, let her know about it. Again, she tracks all that information, and we do use it.
Adam, can you tell them the phone number to call?
5265, 276-5265.
Or you can call City Hall and they'll transfer you down. Call the main desk.
I just wanted to go back to the retaining wall issue. Back on the slide of standard detail S18, it shows a retaining wall on the opposite side of the culvert, and it's saying that that's incorrect. So,
Because that right-of-way, that retaining wall on that picture is in the right-of-way. The retaining wall has to be on the property line.
so okay,
Just like
so
a fence, if someone were to build a fence, they can't build infrastructure in the right-of-way. It has to be on the property line or on property.
so if he were to build a retaining wall on his side,
Correct.
it would be acceptable. Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm Les Hilburn at 102 Bob White. You know, I agree it's a lot of the property owner's responsibility to take care of the property. I've built terraces to divert water away from the property and everything. But I have also been in contact with our stormwater things numerous times for different issues, and nothing has been done. I'd just like to know how, you call them all the time and nothing's been done.
I'm Kelly Cole, 213 Cedar Ridge Drive. I'd just like to present this to you. If I can't build a retaining wall like that, that's my front yard. This is the 6th time I've done this. How do I fix this kind of a problem when the whole street, this is my driveway right here. How do I fix that without being able to do a retaining wall like that?
Well,
You can have that package.
Yeah, you can do a retaining wall. It's just a matter of where the placement is.
But if I don't build it up towards the street, it's going to come in my driveway again.
Well, driveways again are an issue because there's a fair amount of driveways that slope away from the street in Dawson Ranch. And so you're right, if the culvert plugs up or something like that, it's draining down the driveway.
Well, what I'm doing now, because this is a 4-foot drop ditch that's completely filled every time. This is the 5th time I've done this on Cedar Ridge. In fact, that gentleman came there with 3 dump truck loads of dirt to get out of that. And I know that in 2005 when I moved there, one of the comments that was made is that I asked for some of the drainages that were actually filling up the culverts. And one of the comments that I got was, it's going to happen, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. That's been 4,262 tomorrows ago. It's frustrating. I spent $30,000 on this front ditch, and I'm doing $10,000 more this time. When does it end?
I'm Peggy Chapman. I live at 179 Cedar Ridge Drive. I have some pictures of my backyard. We have done everything we can possibly do to keep the water off the front of our property. However, about 7 years ago, the city took the rocks out of the culverts up on Tanner Drive, and they shot the water down through our property, the 3 properties south of us, and to our property. I saw Mr. Lancaster about that time about how come I'm getting all this erosion in my backyard, and he said, well, we have a drainage easement through your property, and that was the end of that. Then 2 years later, we got even worse. I went from having no ditch in my backyard to having a huge ditch in my backyard. This last storm doubled, took my mountain out. I have a 17-foot drop-off of a waterfall from my next-door neighbor to my property. It goes 17 feet from the beginning of my property to the north end of my property. It is destroyed. And if this continues, it won't be destroying my back of my property, it will be destroying my house. And I have talked to these people, and they do absolutely nothing. They don't care. They don't live up there. They do not care. They don't care about us. We pay a lot of property taxes. We pay a lot of money. I'm very angry. I would like people to take a look at this. This is my backyard. And you can see my mountain that's gone, my ditch that is about as wide from here to that window that I didn't have. I had a mountain that came down this way, that met another mountain. I don't have that now. I have this ditch that's this wide. And my backyard is destroyed. And there is nothing I can do about it. I can't hardly get a bobcat back there, and we piled rocks this big up into that channel to try to save our property. Those are now covered by my mountain that has collapsed into the ditch. And I want to bring up one other thing. You keep talking about this 5 foot. I walk Dawson Ranch. I go all the way from Cedar Ridge, or right north of Tanner, all the way to the top of Storm Ridge and Greenhorn. I have been on every street. Many of the properties do not have 5 foot from the culvert over, because they put those culverts, whoever built the houses, underneath the street, right out at the very edge of the street. There is no 5 foot because they put the culverts in the wrong places. That's one thing. Many of those culverts are very, very, very small. They apparently did not require certain things. We've been up there 15 years, and when I put in mine, we put a culvert in. We were going to have it full length of our property. The culvert that we put in cost us $3 grand. And the rest of the property, if we had done that, would have been $6,000 more because of your so-called cleanouts. I've never had my ditch full of anything. My ditch was clear. The problem was the water wasn't going into the ditch. It came off of Tanner Drive, down Cedar Ridge, 2 feet deep of mud and rocks. None of it was going into the ditch. The only water that was in the ditch was the water that was coming out of the sky, not the flood that we had on our street. Destroyed many of my neighbors' properties. And they're going to be paying $3,000, $4,000 to just get the ditch cleaned up. I mean, this makes me angry because we had brought my problem to your attention and to the lady that works in your office who also came out there and just shrugged it off. Well, now all that debris is going down to the Arkansas. You wonder where the sediment comes? That's where it comes from, mountains collapsing. You haven't been up there. You have not gone around and looked at these properties to see where these culverts are put, where the driveways are. But I have, because I wanted to know if people were keeping their clear. They are not. Some people piled in riprap on that 5 foot. Some people didn't do anything because there is no 5 foot. So you need to come up there and survey what you're talking about before you tell us keep that 5 foot clear. Ours is clear. We have 5 foot. We put a retaining wall 5 foot in from our property, and we did not have our property destroyed in the front this year because we have done so much to mitigate the water problem up there. Thousands of dollars. We spent over $6,000 just this year on mitigation. It saved our property because before it's washed everything out. Thank you.
Kevin Kiever, 12 Bear Cub. And I've been in your office, Mr. Lancaster. Glenda's been out to my house twice. I live at the bottom of Bear Cub. And my question to you, you mentioned earlier about the culvert crossing public roads. I get everything from Cedar Ridge down Bluegrass, winds up in my front yard, in my basement. And what determines crossing, putting in a culvert crossing public roads?
So if a culvert crosses a city street, that's the culverts we're talking
Okay,
about.
I'm talking Bear Cub and Bluegrass. You know, keep that water flowing downward instead of coming down into my back.
Oh, you're talking about installing a new one?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. That'll help with me. I got basement issues now. You know, I have 4 inches of mud in my pool.
Sure.
You know, this is getting out of control. Now it's costing me money, and I want it fixed. I want that culvert to go across Bear Cub to bring that water down instead of my front yard. So answer my question though, what determines that need?
Well, that again, that's part of what we're looking at with this study that we're doing. I mean, we're looking at those priorities. One thing that we have to be careful about is I can divert water to help you, but I can't impact somebody else. So we have to be careful about what we're doing downstream.
Thank you. My name is Crystal Damaris. I live at 57 Wild Rose Drive. I actually own a hill adjacent to the junkyard. It's a non-compacted hill. It's dirt. It's rock. It's coming down. We got about 8 to 10 inches renting a machine out of my entire backyard. I own 1.5 acres over there. I know you're not responsible for landscaping. I don't have any. I know in the beginning they were really worried about putting in things because they didn't want to disrupt the natural landscaping. I have none left. To you guys, I don't have any left. That's okay. It's not your problem. It's mine. The problem I'm having that could become a problem for the city is that the junkyard debris is coming through. I've called. There's fluids coming through the hill. This rainstorm through my drainage ditch brought engines, tires, oil, gasoline, you name it. It was a big pile of things that came through. I contacted the owner of the junkyard. Her husband passed away. There's a big issue there. My issue is there's standing water on the other side of the hill that's coming down. That standing water didn't come through my ditch because it's totally blocked on the other side. I'm going to have a breach in that hill, and it's going to take out my house, my neighbor's house, across the street, my other neighbor's house. We're talking a big problem here. The standing water took over a week to even go down. You can't see the ditch on the other side of that hill. It is totally covered in debris. That water, I think, came down from a dam up above. I went up, I researched, and all that water came down, and I'm there. My house is apparently below the ground level with my neighbor. His yard's coming down into my property as well. So I just would like to maybe have someone address this hill issue before we have a really big problem with the breach, because it's just a matter of time. It's already shrunk significantly, and all of that mud was in my property. So I'm not sure what happens with the other side over there, but if there's an emergency list, that might be something you could put on it.
Yeah, a good example of a multi-agency issue, you know, that's in the county purview as far as their zoning rules, their cleanup rules, all those sorts of things. So that's something that we have to work with the county on.
Okay, so we should definitely work with the county because it's going to be a big problem.
We don't have any jurisdiction beyond that hillside. That's part of the issue.
When it comes through the hill, then it's our jurisdiction.
Well, currently it's a trespass from private property to private property, but it's something we can work with the county on. But that's just an example of, like I said, a multi-agency issue.
You guys came out to address the ditch, and I did talk to Ted, the engineer, and
Yeah.
he was having a plan, and he was coming out on Monday.
Yes.
I don't see Ted here, and I haven't seen Ted. But we can fix my side all we want, but that hill that I own half of,
Yep.
it's going to breach. So we're going to have a big problem.
Yeah, we have that. We've talked, and the county is, a lot of this washes from the county. Your water did not just come from Canyon City. It came from the county. It came from the greenhorns behind you there. They've been reluctant to get involved, but I think it's a legitimate question that you got to talk to them about. Because it doesn't just rain in Canyon City. It rains in the county. And that's why we would like to have, like the sewer district, like the water district. It's a district. If we had a district, you'd all pay less because there's more people in the pool to fix the problems. And that's what the discussion you ought to be with your representatives there. Clearly, that's something in the county that they should be taking care of. But they've been reluctant to do that. How many of here would like to have a district just for Dawson Ranch? That doesn't look like a lot of hands. That's right. We can tell you what it's going to cost. But I think it should, to be equitable to everybody, it should be countywide, at least in the Canyon City drainage basin areas. Both sides. I have curb and gutter where I'm at. I didn't get hardly any hail where I live over near the high school. But the street was running pretty full. And I've had it above the curb. I didn't wash anything out because of the curb and everything in my driveway. But that water came from somewhere. But there is an imminent problem. If it fills that ditch up, it's going to overflow into my property. That's the big irrigation ditch. Well, that water didn't just come from Canyon City. It came from the county as well. And I think they should be part of it. That's not going to make me popular. I don't care, frankly. But that's the truth. It does rain in the county, and it rains in Canyon City, and you got the water that came from BLM in the county. You should be talking to them, too.
Could you take the county to court?
No, you can't. I don't think you could sue either the city or the county. I don't think you can. But you can talk to them. They're elected officials. You know, it does rain in the county. Your water came from the county. on the BLM. They're players in this, and they should be involved in it. I'm not going to be popular in the morning, I can tell you.
We are all frustrated with stormwater. And I recognize that all of you have issues. I have issues with stormwater on the north side. But I don't want to offend anybody. We need to concentrate on a solution. And the solution is money. And I see three possibilities. One, you create a special district for Dawson, or that area of Dawson where those people affected want to pitch in and pay for it. Two, you create a large stormwater district that includes something similar to like our fire protection district, where all of those people then pitch in money, and then we start collecting millions of dollars, and we can start doing something. The third option is the folks within the city wind up increasing their stormwater fees substantially, which is still money. A smaller amount of money gets generated, but we can do something. The end result is we have to find a way to generate more money to fix the problem. That's the bottom line. And I'm just like you. It gets frustrating for me. Every time it rains, I've got to go out and try to block my driveway so my garage and my storage shed doesn't wind up with water in it. We need to fix 9th Street. We need to fix Dawson. There's $75 million of projects already noted, probably another $20 million in Dawson Ranch. But the bottom line is we need more money. We need to find a way to generate more money to fix everybody's problem.
Take that map. That's a study those are the drainage basins. That's where your water's coming from. And clearly, those people in there, they're involved. We have beat our brains out to the point I'm getting tired of hearing this since I've been mayor trying to work on this. And I don't care how many dams you put up there and roadways and everything else, it's coming from the county. It's still going to wash them out. And they should be players in this. I'm going to not be popular, but that's the truth. That's a fact. Right there's the fact. That's where the water's coming from. And you can see clearly it's coming a lot, not just from your area, it's coming from the county.
Yes, I live at 79 Wild Rose Drive. Adam's been up to my house quite a few times. Mr. O'Rourke has been up there a few times and stuff. Glenda. The city owns an outlot right next to my property. It floods every time it rains. The city's responsible for that. Adam just made the comment and everything else about maintaining property. Maintain the property. You're not maintaining it. It floods. That culvert plugs up, floods my property. Who do I send the bill to? Who do I send the bill to fix my property? I got $1,300 that I had to put out. Do I send it to you? Who gets it? I don't get return phone calls. People don't know how to return phone calls. You were supposed to call me back too. That's right. That was yeah, you bet. And you saw how it flooded. You know, it gets a little tiring thinking. You know, when people don't return phone calls, trying to get some kind of resolve, and all I hear is, oh, you're doing it right. You're doing a good job. Just keep it up. Yeah, out of my money? No. I will be sending a bill to the city. I will guarantee you. I know I'm just blowing smoke and mirrors, but... And I was the one that called state environmental health on that breached pond.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Millie McCulley, and we live on Fox Run, and you have a municipal code 12-16-020. Our street floods when it rains. our street floods when it rains. We could have actually opened up a whitewater rafting company this last time. The water comes over the road because the vacant property where the gully is has so much dead stuff in it that the water can't go over. Last year when it rained, there were two gentlemen from the city with paperwork in their hand out there, and my husband will tell you, he went out with me. I said, well, Dave said, what are you looking for? And they said, we're looking for the pipe. Well, there's no pipe there. And they go, oh, yes, there's a pipe here. Well, no pipe. And I said, well, y'all can put one in. And they go, good luck with that.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, we're getting long on time here.
Hey, Dave McCulley, just as a caveat to that, you know, as you walked around after that storm, you've seen that a lot of the road flooding and the mud washing came down from undeveloped lots. Somebody owns them. Do they have the same responsibility as we do to maintain? And who's enforcing that? Obviously nobody.
So what are you going to say when somebody or the lot owners gets a notice to do something? People get irritated when they just get notice that they've got weeds. We're going to force it. We will.
There's a bunch of undeveloped lots up there, and that's
Well.
where a lot of that came from.
Okay, a few more, then we're going to go.
Hi. Yeah, Adam, my name is Dan Inman. I have a point of clarification. You said that no projects in Dawson Ranch currently identified on the priority list. That the priority list was created before Dawson Ranch was identified as concern. When was the priority list created?
The priority list?
Mm-hmm.
That was the 1998 committee that put that together.
Okay.
There's a lot of new construction in Dawson Ranch right now. I don't know how many building permits have been issued this year, but there's a lot of construction. Any way that the contractors and new owners, these people can help mitigate some of these issues?
Yeah, additional regulation and enforcement, sure.
I think I have a concern that maybe all of us have. We've got a problem here that's huge. And you talked about focusing on solution, and I think that's what we need to do. However, I'm starting to hear, well, I can build a retaining wall and it'll protect my front yard. I can do this, I can do that. We need to have somebody, I would assume the city, take the lead in this thing so that we do it in a way that when we're done, we step back and go, this really worked nice. We can all protect our property with enough money, enough rock, and enough concrete, but we need a plan. We need to do something. We live on a cul-de-sac, Osprey. The water comes down the hill, goes across the cul-de-sac, and comes into our yard, and there goes my landscaping, $2,000 a year. I don't care really about the $2,000 a year. I care about how many more years are we going to go through this. And so what I would encourage and ask happen is that we don't have a committee to have a committee. We have a committee to sit down, do a study or whatever we need to do to look at from the very top, the highest house, to the lowest house in Dawson Ranch. What's the solution? How do we do this so we solve this problem?
Go ahead, Don.
So to follow up with what he's asking, how in-depth is the study that we're looking at conducting for Dawson Ranch?
We are just looking at right-of-way culverts and that analysis. That's all we're doing.
So will that address many of the issues that he's talking about?
No, no.
And what would that take?
A lot of money.
A lot of money. Okay. All right.
How's that? Walk us down 19
So is it 2015 was observation? Yeah.
Okay, we're getting done. A little longer than I thought, but one more.
Okay. How do we get the county involved in helping? I didn't have a flood. I've been up here 10 years, I live on Rapid Court. Haven't had a flood in my back since we lived there. But the BLM or the county or somebody cut down a whole bunch of trees. There's 14 mounds of trees, 14. They're this tall and probably 10 feet in diameter. When they cut all those out, all the runoff ended up across my backyard. My fence is destroyed, and then the ditch along the edge of it off the property. I'm adjacent to the BLM, so do I contact the BLM on that, or contact the county? I mean, they left that stuff up there dead for now a year.
If it's on BLM, you should contact them. I think you should go ahead. They're your representatives. They got 3 of them there. You can set up the same deal that you did with us and have that discussion. We've had those discussions. We know where the basins are. We'd have to put dams on BLM to stop the water from washing down into your area, especially on Osprey and those other ones up in there. That's where it's coming from. That's where we'd have to do start. You start where it's starting. But you need to talk with them too, because we'd like them aboard. That's an answer. It's going to be cheaper for everybody. Okay?
Ashley and I are on the committee that's been working with the county and other representatives to try to come to an agreement in terms of how do we expand this whole district and come up with a fair and equitable mechanism to generate revenue. We've always believed that a fair mechanism is impervious surface charge. In other words, if you have an open lot, you would be charged 10 cents. If you have a lot that's covered with asphalt, you would be charged $10 because that asphalt would cause runoff. That's one concept that's based upon a fee. The county commissioners are adamantly opposed to any type of revenue-generating source that is not voter approved. In other words, if we have a fee, the county commissioners have told us they would not support that plan. So that leaves you with increasing property tax or increasing sales tax. The problem with sales tax is we typically like to talk about, you know, a 0.5% increase is going to cost you $1.50 on a Big Mac at McDonald's. The other big problem is, what's that 0.5% going to cost you on a new car? You're not going to buy the new car in Canyon City. You're going to go somewhere else and buy it. So we got to look at the big picture. But as I'm understanding it in our meetings with the county, so long as we're talking about a fee-based and not a voter-based revenue-generating mechanism, they will not support it. So the answer is you need to communicate with the commissioners in terms of letting them know your concerns and the fact that you vote for those commissioners. And Ashley and I are available to help explain more. But again, I don't like this either. We need more money. We're collecting pennies, and we need to be spending dollars.
Okay. The sensible thing is we know the basins. Those are studies that were out. We know where the water's coming from. About 80% or more is the county. And so I strongly believe that an improvement district, just like Fremont Sanitation it's an improvement district by itself, self-supporting, to take care of this would work. And then everybody gets off a lot cheaper because there's more players in it. And that will stop where the water's coming from. It's not coming from you, it's coming above you. And it's washing down into your property. Why don't you talk to them? You're not holding them accountable. We have, because you need to talk to them. We have. I've been mayor for 3 years. And we've been beating our heads out trying to figure this out. And frankly, that's what it comes down to. If you can find a better mechanism, we've talked about grants and all kinds of stuff. And to me, it's you get the number of people, where the water's coming from, slow it down, pond it, whatever you're going to do, but everybody's got to take part in it. Or the burden goes on our citizens. And we just really don't like doing that. Okay, we need to have just a few more, then we're going to go. Quickly.
Okay, I was thinking most of us are putting our money where our mouth is. We want these things fixed. I heard lots of people saying that they're spending $10,000, they're spending $10,000 a year, $30,000. We're fixing things, they're coming down. And my question is, I got property, okay, I live at 65 Blue Grouse is where I live, and I want to fix it. I want to fix it right. I don't want that washed out. It comes down Blue Grouse and it comes right down the side and it just totally washed out everything down the side. Well, I'm looking at it going, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to put it so I'm not flooding out Carl's house next door and I'm not flooding out Phil's house on the other side. I don't know how to fix this. So that's the thing too, is that I don't have a problem putting the money to fix it, but who do I talk to? How do I know how to fix this? And I think a lot of us, if we could spend the $10,000, the $20,000, the $30,000, we'd fix it. And we wouldn't flood out our friends.
Can I just follow up real quick with her question here as to the county commissioners? If you as a group addressed a meeting with the county commissioners, a group this large with as many concerns and as many frustrations that you've brought to us, they might just listen. We've tried sitting in countless meetings. They need to hear from you. They're your representatives too. So you guys need to get out there and talk to them. That's just one idea. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Waters. I have a question. When you're talking about doing a district, can you tell if you did a whole Dawson Ranch, created us as a district for an improvement, can you guesstimate how much it would cost each residence?
Yes. Short answer is yes. Short answer is yes.
Yeah, you can. You'd have to, yeah, we could.
The long answer is you'd have to decide what improvements you want to make and those sorts of things. Yeah. I mean, we could give you a basic linear footprint.
Yeah, if you just curb and gutter. There's other places. I know when I came here 45 years ago, we were doing special improvement districts in East Canyon, and streets elected to put the curb and gutter in, and then they got billed and paid it with their taxes. So it might not be the answer. I think the bigger answer is stop that flow of water from where it's coming from and slow it down. And it's not in your subdivision, obviously. It's off your subdivision. And we're still in the county, and even in Canyon City. I'm not.
Preston?
Quick question, we have one of the culverts that goes under the street just to the east of our property. Do you inspect those, or should I let you know that it's completely clogged?
We do inspect those, but we always appreciate you guys calling us, letting us know there's an issue.
Okay, because culvert, which you already mentioned, are too small, and
Yeah.
we have, I live in 66 Blue Grouse, and we're up right across the street, and we have that big river that comes down back behind us, and when that rain was going on, my husband went out, and basically the culvert was so small, everything was just backing up because there was so much debris and so forth, so then that's what caused things to go uphill rather than going through and down, so
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Yeah, please
Okay.
let us know. Again, we talked about resources. We have Glenda, one person that goes out and does those inspections. She tries to hit everything at least once a year.
Preston?
Go ahead, and then let's wrap it up.
I mean, you've got a really good group here in terms of all of you people being affected. But if you look at the entire city, the people that are affected by stormwater runoff is really minor. So most people really don't care. You've got a really good group of concerned people that are being impacted, and I suggest you seriously look at the cost for a district. And that'll give you a baseline. Do you want to do it yourselves, or do you want to try something else? But that's a serious option I think you need to look at in terms of you people pitching in, fixing your problem. And don't worry about the rest of the city. I hate to say it like that, but that is a serious option I think you need to look at in terms of what's it going to cost you.
Okay, we're about done.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
I live on Cedar Ridge Drive. Right on Tanner, a block up the road, there's a huge culvert. That goes in our backyard. That's the one that goes. Where does that water originally start from? But
The hill. I'd have to go look at it, I don't know. Yeah. I think on Greenhouse. Sure. That's what I'm saying, is the source actually is off Dawson Ranch in the county. It's probably on BLM.
We had, okay, let's go back 5 years.
All right.
Culvert was partially blocked. And we could live with water coming down at that point in time. But then the city got the bright idea to go up there and open up that culvert. Instead of us getting 40, 50%, now we get 100%, and there's no way in hell we do it.
So, okay.
So can they close up that culvert a little bit?
I don't know. Yes, sir. We got to go. It's 8 o'clock.